Mr. Speaker, the people of Ainamoi who have stood by my side, Mr. Speaker, and that is why I am in this county assembly. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, allow me to thank the mover of the motion, Mr. Speaker, that is the Honorable Rogony, because this motion, Mr. Speaker, is even was supposed to have been moved even last year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the problem that has belittled this county, Mr. Speaker, is the problems that we've been trying, Mr. Speaker, to find solutions, Mr. Speaker. One of the greatest challenge that we have in our county, Mr. Speaker, is the revenue collection, Mr. Speaker. You remember, Mr. Speaker, that we've had several meetings with His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Speaker, and the Finance Department, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the meeting we used taxpayers' money, Mr. Speaker, to have a meeting in Mombasa, Mr. Speaker, and I want to, the Honorable Minister will stand in for me, Mr. Speaker, for some other duties that I have. Mr. Speaker, I am saying this because, Mr. Speaker, we did the first meeting, Mr. Speaker, in Mombasa, the county executive members and the county assembly members, Mr. Speaker. The agenda of the meeting, Mr. Speaker, was revenue, and that is 1 year down the line, Mr. Speaker. We put measures that we thought are going to assist the county government of Kericho, Mr. Speaker, to meet its targets of revenue, Mr. Speaker. That was the first meeting in Mombasa, Mr. Speaker. Number two, Mr. Speaker, we spend public funds. We had a meeting in Nakuru, and we had a candid discussion with this Excellency, the Governor, Mr. Speaker, plus the CEC in charge of finance, CEO in charge of finance, and the entire membership of the County Assembly, Mr. Speaker. An hotel called Mboita in Nakuru, Mr. Speaker, which I think in future, Mr. Speaker, I want to refund the money that I spent in that hotel, because we did 2 meetings, Mr. Speaker, but there is no results, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remember in the very meeting that we had in Mboita Nakuru, Mr. Speaker, we even asked the governor that there were some officers that were taking this money, Mr. Speaker, but the governor said, leave alone this guy. I am using this guy to do my dirty work. If you remember in Nakuru, Mr. Speaker, and that is a governor saying that he's using a county officer who is the former CS, Mr. Speaker, that we removed from office through an impeachment, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the mover of the motion for impeaching that CS, Mr. Speaker, because the governor said, I'm using that guy to do dirty politics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, number two, we had a meeting in Exotic Hotel, Mr. Speaker, trying to find a solution to this revenue issue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, because if we don't collect, forget about development. Mr. Speaker, as we speak today, Mr. Speaker, you heard that Kericho County, from Auditor General's report, that Kericho County, we are number 42 out of 47. The counties that we are competing, Mr. Speaker, do have very few, revenue streams, Mr. Speaker. Imagine a county like Kericho competing with Tana River. A county like Kericho competing with Wajir, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the reason, and I want to thank the mover of the motion, the reason why we are discussing these motions today, Mr. Speaker, is because the county executive, Mr. Speaker, we've been dealing with the CEOs and the CECs. But this time round, I want to thank the mover, because we cannot go to branches every other time. We now want to go to the big tree. We fell down the tree, and we make sure that this governor, Mr. Speaker, is taken back to the university, Mr. Speaker. I think he can do better in the university, Mr. Speaker, apart from the other issues that was raised by the mover of the motion, and that falls under the gender-based, and the Honorable Deputy Majority Leader, I know, is going to take time there, Mr. Speaker, but he is not supposed to preside over. Why we are saying this, Mr. Speaker, Article 179(4) of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, reaffirms the governor's position as the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Speaker, of the county, Mr. Speaker, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, the law vests the primary responsibility for decision making and ensuring the well-being of the county government, Mr. Speaker, rests squarely on the governor. Mr. Speaker, the reason why the governor is being impeached, Mr. Speaker, is because of the Article 179(4) of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, that positions the governor as the county executive. So when the county executive officer, Mr. Speaker, for example, if we have issues in this county assembly, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you, we will never go for a junior staff. We will come for your neck, because you are the executive officer of the county assembly of Kericho. So the governor, Mr. Speaker, has failed severally, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what we discussed, we had the Londiani accident, Mr. Speaker, where money were collected by the victims, Mr. Speaker. A fundraiser was done, Mr. Speaker, and in fact, there is the deputy president, Mr. Speaker, gave a donation of 2 million shillings, Mr. Speaker. But that donation was used the next day in a fundraiser that was in Bureau's here and another place, Mr. Speaker. These are the money that is meant for the victims, Mr. Speaker, so that how inhumane, we are fundraising for victims that lost their lives, 53 to be specific, Mr. Speaker, and others that were hospitalized, Mr. Speaker. A whopping 13 point something million, almost 14 million, Mr. Speaker, was collected to assist the family. The governor gave an assurance, Mr. Speaker, that there is no single victim that is going to pay for our hospitals, Mr. Speaker. I am privileged because I sat in that ad hoc committee that the governor later on referred to it, Mr. Speaker, as the funeral committee, Mr. Speaker. A well-constituted committee that was passed by this county assembly, Mr. Speaker, a governor calling such a committee, Mr. Speaker, a funeral committee, Mr. Speaker. That shows the governor, Mr. Speaker, demeans the county assembly and demeans these honorable members, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I used to, in fact, sometimes, Mr. Speaker, I was to begin my master's degree, law degree, Mr. Speaker, because I used to like this profession, Mr. Speaker. But today, Mr. Speaker, when Katwa Kigen, this is the Katwa Kigen that represented the son in ICC, Mr. Speaker. But I saw somebody, Mr. Speaker, you cannot just be used, Mr. Speaker, to come and demean the county assembly, Mr. Speaker. In fact, from today, Mr. Speaker, I am proceeding to PhD in, Mr. Speaker, public policy and administration. That is why I mastered, Mr. Speaker, because I have seen there's nothing good in going to some of these cases, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, a money that was meant for the victim is being misappropriated, Mr. Speaker. Then, when the whistleblower, Mr. Speaker, who happens to be the deputy governor, Mr. Speaker, blow the whistle in TFC, Mr. Speaker, a committee was formed. We went to the bottom of that matter, Mr. Speaker. That the county executive used now the public funds. Use the money that was in emergency fund to pay for some of the victims, Mr. Speaker. What that is, Mr. Speaker, inhuman to our county governor, Mr. Speaker. Apart from the revenue, Mr. Speaker, yes. You've had one of the as I summarize, one of the junior staff, Mr. Speaker, said that the governor needs 500,000 on a daily basis, Mr. Speaker. What county are we running, Mr. Speaker? And that is why these people, Mr. Speaker, they do not want to automate the revenue, because once you automate the revenue, the issue, Mr. Speaker, of getting cash in your pocket, Mr. Speaker, will be a thing of the past. Once you automate this, Mr. Speaker, the only county in Kenya that still collect their revenue using manual, Mr. Speaker, and getting cash and using exercise books, Mr. Speaker, is Kericho County, Mr. Speaker. Which is a shame. This is a county, Mr. Speaker, that is endowed with resources, Mr. Speaker. If they cannot declare a single cent in Kabianga tea farm, a farm that has 400 acres of tea, Mr. Speaker. Personally, in my place, I have 5 acres of tea, Mr. Speaker, and I can give you the kilos because we are waiting for bonus, Mr. Speaker. I have 14,000 and some, 14,617 kilos, Mr. Speaker. And that is a 5-acre piece of land, Mr. Speaker, that I don't even manage well because I'm in politics. Sometimes members of the public goes to my farm, and take the tea leaves to tea buying centers, Mr. Speaker, and I don't do anything because they are saying this. Then I'm getting almost that kind of cages. A Kabianga tea farm, Mr. Speaker, with the county machinery collecting meal, Mr. Speaker. And as I wind up, Mr. Speaker, in Amoi market, Mr. Speaker, they are declaring 400 shillings per day. You remember, Mr. Speaker, there was a statement that was raised by the Honorable Matthew, Mr. Speaker, and with all due respect, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the honorable members. The only place And in fact, the Honorable Tarimbo, Mr. Speaker, who is, I think, is vying for some bigger seat, Mr. Speaker. This is the only place that you can come here, Mr. Speaker.
Order, but do we have a name? We don't have a name.
The Honorable Paul Chirchira, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is the 16 members of the County Assembly are ashamed of this county, Mr. Speaker. You cannot, Mr. Speaker, be taken, Mr. Speaker, hostage. I understand they are in an island in Uganda, Mr. Speaker, called Rusinga Island. An elected member, Mr. Speaker, leave alone the nominated, and I want to applaud the nominated MCAs that are stood with this cause, Mr. Speaker. You can take an elected member, Mr. Speaker, to an island in Uganda, Mr. Speaker, so that they don't appear before the county assembly to speak on behalf of the people, Mr. Speaker. That is shame, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I have stayed in this county assembly long enough, Mr. Speaker. And you know they are spending the same revenue that we are trying to get solutions here in an island in Rusinga, Mr. Speaker. Another one called Matthew. You know, Mr. Speaker, we were in a funeral in Kipchimchi, Mr. Speaker. He's saying unpalatable words to these honorable members, Mr. Speaker. He raised the Kazi Mitaani statement, and that is why a committee was formed, Mr. Speaker. And he's now in Rusinga Island. He's the one busting these honorable members. But I want to tell them, Mr. Speaker, as I wind up, Mr. Speaker, they have a day to destiny, Mr. Speaker. We want to tell them, Mr. Speaker, we will never allow this county to go to the dogs, Mr. Speaker. We will send the chief executive officer of this county home, Mr. Speaker. But I want to assure you, Mr. Speaker, even those CECs that are running up and down, Mr. Speaker, trying to look for these honorable members, Mr. Speaker, even if they do demonstration from morning to evening, Mr. Speaker, we will never tire. Mr. Speaker, we want to assure you, we are prepared to work this journey, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the senators, once we pass, and I want to write the honorable members, when the history of the third county assembly will be written, Mr. Speaker, you will have a chapter or two as those MCAs who stood with the people when the people needed the most, Mr. Speaker. We are on the right side of history. When you go to impeachment motion of 2014, that was moved by Albert, Mr. Speaker, as I wind up. You were the CC in charge of finance, Mr. Speaker. When the motion was moved to hoster Professor Chepkwony, Mr. Speaker, when Chepkwony came back, Mr. Speaker, things now went straight forward, Mr. Speaker. So we want to tell the members here, Mr. Speaker, that we are not going to tire. In fact, we are going, Mr. Speaker, we will be bringing impeachment. Before the people of Ainamoi sent me home, Mr. Speaker, because of some 1, 2, 3 things that I never completed because there is no county resources, Mr. Speaker, I will send someone home so that he waits for me at home in 2027, Mr. Speaker. I will not allow, Mr. Speaker. So as I want, Mr. Speaker, allow me to thank these gallant soldiers, Mr. Speaker, and ladies, for standing on behalf of the people of Kericho. Never be bowed, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Ogon, this is your constitutional mandate of doing oversight, Mr. Speaker. So never tire trying to correct the county executive, Mr. Speaker. We will call them by their names. For the members of the county assembly who decided to go and joyride in an island in Uganda, Mr. Speaker, including the honorable members the 2 honorable members from Ainamoi, Mr. Speaker, I don't even speak about the honorable Ishma and honorable Noela, because these are nominated MCA who has no interest in Kericho County, Mr. Speaker. And this is the same person, Mr. Speaker, who nominated. How can you nominate someone who does not have interest in your county, Mr. Speaker? When matters like these are being discussed, Mr. Speaker, they are joyriding in Uganda, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to make it very clear that anybody who is going to be nominated in this county, Mr. Speaker, must have interest in Kericho County, Mr. Speaker. I want to applaud the Honorable Gekonya, Mr. Speaker, because he is one of the minorities, but they are living in this county. They know what the people of this county are going through, Mr. Speaker. And Gekonyo, when the history will be written, you stood with the minority community of this county. You stood with the majority community of this county, Mr. Speaker. When you ask the Honorable Ishma, where does he live? Does she has land in this county, Mr. Speaker, apart from the gases that he sells along the roadside, Mr. Speaker? Sell the gases along the roadside, Mr. Speaker, is even, Mr. Speaker, dangerous, Mr. Speaker. How can you set up a gas station along an highway, Mr. Speaker? And it must be removed. When you ask about the Honorable Mr. Speaker, where does he live? Where is his land in the Kericho County, Mr. Speaker? Apart from living in some of these rented houses in this county. So we will make a statement as the leaders of this county, Mr. Speaker, that next time a nomination is being done, we need to look at someone who hails from this county, even if you come from a minority, you need to have land, so that when you are discussing about the issues affecting the Kipsigis of Kericho, Mr. Speaker, at least you feel, how does Noela from Siaya feel the pinch of these people of this government, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, as I finish on behalf of the people of Inamoy, Mr. Speaker, I want to support the mover of the motion. I support the motion, and we will do our part, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
And as I finish, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as I finish, the independence of various arms of government. The county assembly, Mr. Speaker, is independent. No arm of government, Mr. Speaker, should infringe on the rights of another arm of government, Mr. Speaker. If the purported orders, Mr. Speaker, has anything, they should wait for us to finish the process. Then if you think that your rights were infringed, you now go to other agencies, Mr. Speaker, to seek redress. So the county assembly is independent, Mr. Speaker, and we will do and discharge our mandate, Mr. Speaker, until the end of 2027. If God gives us another grace, Mr. Speaker, to represent our people either here or there, Mr. Speaker, we will be very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, thank you, and I support the motion.
All right, thank you, the Honorable Achiriot. But the Honorable Gilbert